New York, the winter of 1907. A bank lobby, marble and brass, a room built to make money feel permanent. At the teller's window stands a boy of 13, sent by his mother to cash a check. He has to reach up a little to slide it across the counter. It is for about $5. The teller reads it and pauses. 6 years earlier, no teller in New York would have paused over this family's name. The family had come to New York from London when the boy was a year old. His father dealt in china, good dishes, porcelain figurines, and dealt in it well. A home on Upper Fifth Avenue, a maid, a cook, a French governess. Shelves of fine things that rang when you touched them. Then, in 1903, before the boy turned 10, his father died, and the business began to die with him. His mother fought. She turned the house into a boarding house, and strangers ate at the family table. And she tried to trade her way back. She borrowed money to buy stocks. On margin, the brokers called it. Put up a little of your own, borrow the rest, and a small rise pays you double. But the borrowed part must be paid back whatever happens. So a small fall takes everything. In 1907, the market crashed, and Dorothy Grossbaum was wiped out. So that is what the teller is holding. Is Dorothy Grossbaum good for $5? The boy heard every word of it. The story is told that he carried that moment for the rest of his life. The humiliation first, and underneath it, the question. A stranger had weighed his family and asked what it was good for. Somewhere in the world there were men whose job was deciding such things. He was going to learn how it was done. The way out was school. The boy won a scholarship to Columbia and went through it like a man who knew what studying was for, graduating in 1914, second in his class. Before his final semester ended, 3 separate departments, English, philosophy, and mathematics, invited him to join the faculty, not to study, to teach. He was 20 years old, and he turned all 3 down and went downtown instead, to start at the bottom, a clerk at a firm that traded bonds. That was June 1914. He enjoyed pointing out, decades later, what the smartest men in America saw coming that summer. Nothing. The market, he writes, did not even suspect that a world war was to break out in 2 months and close down the New York Stock Exchange. 2 months into the boy's career, the biggest market on earth simply shut its doors. The war reached the family's name too. German-sounding names had turned suspect in America, and somewhere in those years the Grossbaums became the Grahams. The boy from the counter now had the name on the cover of this book, and the name climbed. Clerk, then analyst, then partner, and before long an operation of his own with other people's money in his care. It was a wonderful time to be a young man on Wall Street, and that is exactly how it got him. In April 1919, the country was mad for automobiles, the obvious future of that hour, and new companies with tire and motor in their names were coming to market like spring weather. One of them was called Savold Tire. Graham put money in. On its first day of trading, it rose 250%. One day, the automobile future was entirely real. Savold's part in it was not. There was never much of a company under that price, just the name shaped like the future, and money chasing it. By October, 6 months after that first day, the fraud was exposed and the stock was worthless. What Graham built out of that burn was not shyness but a method, and the method was reading. He became known, the story goes, for researching companies in microscopic, almost molecular detail. Not tips, not the mood of the ticker room. Documents, the duller the better. A dull page is an unread page. In 1925, the reading paid. Oil pipeline companies had to file reports with a federal commission in Washington. Obscure paperwork, written for regulators, stamped, shelved, and forgotten. Almost nobody on Wall Street looked at it. Graham read it, and buried in those filings he found a company called Northern Pipeline. Its stock sold at $65 a share. And sitting quietly on its books, the filings showed, were high-grade bonds, safe, interest-paying paper, worth at least $80 a share by themselves. A strongbox priced at 65, holding 80 before you counted a single foot of pipe. It was the grocer's question. How much for what you actually get? Asked of a stock and answered out of public paper anyone could have read. He bought the stock. Then he did the part almost nobody did in 1925. He showed up. An owner, in front of the managers, asking them, meeting after meeting, to pay that idle hoard out to the people it belonged to. 3 years later, he came away at $110 a share. One more story from the apprentice years. The one Graham told on himself, in a lecture reprinted at the back of this book. In 1912, he had stepped out of college for a term to run a research project, and the work was done on machines most businessmen had never laid eyes on. Punched cards, mechanical sorters, tabulators, leased out by a small firm with a name only an engineer could love, the Computing Tabulating Recording Company. Graham worked the machines himself, day after day. He admitted later what he had felt about that little company, a kind of sentimental interest, and the private conviction that he was a sort of technological expert on its products, one of the few men in finance who had actually touched the things. So picture him in early 1916, 21 years old, outside the mahogany door of the man who ran his firm. A man he calls only Mr. A.N. He has his case ready, and it is a good case. The stock is selling in the middle 40s. It earned $6.50 a share last year. It has just started paying a dividend, and he knows the product with his own hands. His first real pitch, built out of everything he is. The reading, the arithmetic, the machines he can work that his elders can't. He goes in and makes it. Mr. A.N. looked at the young man pityingly. "Ben," he said, "do not mention that company to me again. I would not touch it with a 10-foot pole. Its 6% bonds are selling in the low 80s, and they are no good. So how can the stock be any good? Everybody knows there's nothing behind it but water. The bonds were the company's own IOUs, and the low 80s meant $1 of its promises sold for 80-odd cents. The lenders had doubts, and water was the era's word for the charge underneath, a balance sheet pumped up with assets that were not really there." Graham went back to what he called his statistician's cubbyhole, a chastened young man, and telling the story 40 years on, he insisted on the part a lesser man would have left out. Mr. A.N. was right. A decade later, the company opened its books and owned up. Practically every dollar it had once claimed stood behind that stock had been water, exactly as the old man said. But the business itself earned its way out, real profits rising fivefold across those years, until the balance sheet turned honest. And in 1926, it took a new name, International Business Machines. "I never bought a share of it in my life," Graham wrote. Not even after its name was changed. The rules had told him the truth, and the truth cost him IBM. He printed the story anyway. By 1929, Graham was 35 and a success, running money for other people. Then came the crash, and crash is almost the wrong word, because the famous day, October 1929, was only the opening. The market fell, caught its breath, and went on falling for nearly 3 more years. By 1932, by later accounts, the money in Graham's care was down close to 70 cents on the dollar. Hold that number against the story so far. This was not his mother, borrowing on margin. This was not the young man writing Savold. This was the most careful reader of documents on Wall Street, the man who found the $80 nobody else bothered to look for, and careful was not enough. General Electric, the bluest name in American business, along with the market's whole leading average, would need 25 years to climb back to where it stood in 1929. Graham survived, and in the wreckage, he went hunting, because the ruins were full of northern pipelines now. Sound businesses priced below the money in their tills by a public too frightened to count it. And while he hunted, he worked out what exactly had failed. What failed was not effort. What failed was not brains. What failed was the belief that anyone, amateur, expert, or Benjamin Graham, can know what the market is about to do. That belief he threw out for good. In its place, he kept the only things the crash had not embarrassed: what a business owns, what it earns, what it would be worth to a sober buyer, and the discipline never to pay more rules instead of forecasts. In 1934, the rules became a book, Security Analysis, written with his Columbia colleague David Dodd, was the volume that turned the judging of businesses from a hunch into a profession. The book where the three-part definition was first set down in type. And the rules did not just sit on a page. For the next 20 years, the firm Graham ran with his partner Jerome Newman put them to work. And the record they left stands, by every later accounting, as one of the best long-term track records in Wall Street's history. And he went back to Columbia. The university that had offered the 20-year-old 3 professorships got its professor after all, at the front of an evening lecture hall now, teaching Wall Street men what the beatings had taught him: the boarding house, the flame, the filings, the 10-foot pole, the 3 gray years. He taught it for decades, and the men who took it went out and taught everyone else. In one of those rows, eventually, sat a student we will meet at the end of this season. Remember the teller. He was not being cruel. He was asking the only question that Marble Room existed to ask: what a thing is actually good for, and how safely you can say so. The boy who heard it spent the rest of his life asking it back. He asked it of Savold, and the answer was nothing. He asked it of Northern Pipeline, and the answer was more than anyone had bothered to check. He asked it of his own judgment, after 1932, and we built the answer from the ground up. His whole book is that question, grown up, and the rules the beatings paid for still had to face the market, every morning, forever. To show what that feels like from the inside, he wrote the most famous page in this book. Imagine, he says, that you own a share in a private business that cost you $1,000, you and a partner. A courteous, obliging partner, with one flaw. Every day, without fail, he seeks you out and names a price. Some days his price is sensible. Some days it is, in Graham's words, a little short of silly. He never misses a day, and he never will. Graham gave this partner a name,